One of the most powerful things the sea ever taught me was how small I actually was. And strangely, that became comforting because when your mind is overloaded with stress, identity, pressure, expectation, your problems can start feeling enormous, like they consume your entire reality. But the ocean has a way of putting all of that into perspective very quickly because the sea doesn't care who you are. It doesn't care about your status, your money, your image, your achievements, your failures. You step into that water and you're immediately humbled. There were mornings where conditions were completely calm. Flat water, soft sunrise coming up over the back of Herm, hardly any wind. Moments where you could float on your back and genuinely feel at peace with existence for a little while. And then there were other days where the sea felt almost violent. Dark skies, huge swells, cold wind, aggressive waters. And somehow, I loved both versions equally. Because both versions made me feel alive. And at that point in my life, feeling alive mattered more than comfort. There was one particular morning I'll never forget. Conditions were rough. I mean, properly rough. Maybe like a force 5 or 6. Most people weren't swimming that day for obvious reasons. And honestly, I completely understand why. The sea looked angry, dark, heavy, powerful. But something in me still wanted to experience it. Not recklessly. Certainly not arrogantly either. I respected the danger massively. So I didn't go far that day. It wasn't the usual out swim. I only swam out far enough to truly feel the energy of the water. And what happened next is genuinely one of the most surreal experiences I've ever had in my life. The swells were enormous. Walls of water rolling towards me like moving buildings. I'd rise up one side and then drop down the other, again and again and again. The sea was throwing me around effortlessly. Occasionally, I'd swallow the salt water, and the wind was freezing, and the sky above me was dark grey. And you know what? Despite all of that, and with my hand on my heart, I felt unbelievably calm in that situation. That's the strange contradiction I still struggle to explain properly. Externally, chaos. Internally, stillness. I remember sitting afterwards eating food amongst all of that violent weather, feeling more emotionally regulated than I did during normal everyday life. Think about how strange that is. Huge crashing waves, cold wind, dangerous conditions. And somehow my nervous system felt safer there than it did sitting in an ordinary human environment carrying stress and emotional pressure. Looking back now, I think the sea started teaching me something very important psychologically. Control is an illusion, or at least far less real than we think it is, because the ocean doesn't negotiate with your ego. You cannot dominate it. You cannot emotionally manipulate it. You cannot force it to become calm because you want it calm. You either learn to respect conditions or conditions humble you. And honestly, that lesson slowly started changing the way I viewed life itself. I think before that period of my life, I was trying to control everything internally. How people saw me, how situations unfolded, how life should feel, how relationships should work, how stress should just disappear. But nature doesn't operate like that. The sea taught me sometimes conditions are rough, sometimes visibility disappears, sometimes life becomes uncomfortable, and your job isn't always to control it. Sometimes your job is simply stay calm, stay aware, respect reality, keep breathing. That lesson would eventually become one of the biggest foundations of who I later became psychologically. I think the sea also reconnected me to my body during a period where emotionally I'd become numb. Because there's a difference between being alive and feeling alive. And during that period, I often felt like a shadow of myself on land. I didn't feel heard. I didn't feel understood. I didn't feel particularly valued emotionally. But in the sea, none of that existed. The water didn't judge me. The ocean didn't care about my insecurities. It simply demanded presence. And presence became medicine to me. There were moments floating in open water, watching sunrise hit the surface around me, when I genuinely felt connected to life again. Not fixed, not healed, just connected. Even if only briefly. And those moments became incredibly precious to me, probably more precious than people around me realised. I think that's why I sometimes became emotional walking back afterwards, because for a short period of time my mind stopped hurting. And when you've been carrying emotional chaos privately for a long time, even temporary peace can feel overwhelming. Looking back now, I don't think the sea healed me, not fully, but I do think it regulated me enough to survive a version of myself that was struggling deeply internally. And maybe that's enough sometimes. Maybe healing doesn't always begin with huge breakthroughs. Maybe sometimes it begins with one quiet place where your nervous system finally feels safe enough to soften. For me, that place was the ocean. The sea taught me something I'll probably carry for the rest of my life. Strength is not controlling chaos. Strength is remaining present inside it. And somewhere amongst the cold water, the violent swells, the dark mornings, and the silent sunrises, I slowly started becoming somebody calmer than the person who first walked into the sea.